Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for this conference call and webinar. My name is Lauren Applebaum and I'm the Communications Director of Respectability. Now we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that fights stigmas and advances opportunities for people with disabilities. We work with entertainment, policymakers, educators, self-advocates, nonprofits, employers, faith-based organizations, philanthropists, journalists, and online media to fight stigma and advance opportunities for people with disabilities. Led by people with disabilities and those who love them, we know that people with disabilities and their families have the same hopes and dreams as everyone else. We do not lobby. Our free tools and factual resources inform so people with disabilities can achieve the education, training, jobs, security, and good health that everyone needs and deserves. We're here today to learn about a new national poll of registered voters showing the size, scope, and varied nature of the disability community in the United States. This is the first poll to cover a number of new issues from a disability perspective, including the views of the disability community on the NRA, pro-life groups, President Donald Trump, healthcare, values, and other issues. Live captions are available at the bottom of your screen. Please submit questions via the online system or via phone. Press the number 7 and then the pound sign to get in the queue to ask a question. All questions will be taken at the end of the presentation. I'd now like to introduce Stan Greenberg, who is a New York Times best-selling author and polling advisor to presidents, prime ministers, and CEOs, and right now is conducting deep research in more than a dozen countries. He was a senior pollster for President Bill Clinton and Vice President Al Gore, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and President Nelson Mandela. His corporate clients include Boeing, BP, Microsoft, and other global companies. Greenberg was inducted into the American Association of Political Consultants Hall of Fame. He has been described as the father of modern polling techniques, the De Niro of all political consultants, and an unrivaled international guru. Esquire magazine named him one of the most important people of the 21st century. Republican pollster Frank Luntz says, "Stan Greenberg scares the hell out of me. He doesn't just have a finger on the people's pulse, he's got an IV injected into it. He's the best." He is always on call because his research is relevant, innovative, and deep, whether it is exploring the new economy, climate change, new gender roles, political reform, or the role of millennials. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jennifer, as well, Mitraki, for the role that Respectability has come to play with respect to disabilities. We are proud to be part of the bipartisan teams that have heard this community, its attitudes, and its role on issues and elections. One part of what's refreshing about this poll is just the fact that folks have attitudes on broad range of issues. Sometimes they're very distinctive, sometimes they're aligned, but it's important for everyone to recognize that there is a disability community, and it has views and strong views that are impacted by current events, and that we're going to use this presentation to go through those. This poll was just done with a full national sample of registered voters. About 2/3 were done with cell phones, so it's very representative of the registered voting population. And when you look at the different slices of the pie, and the size of these pies is, by the way, is not in proportion, but they really are important slices of the pie. 17% of the disability of people themselves report having a disability. 17%. Just think about that. Number almost 1 in 5. But 51%, half of them, if you go to people that include immediate family members, and then you get to close friends, you move even further, and so you begin to see the scope of this community. The 51% are the people with a disability connection, but it spreads further. If you both friends and family, and also people that do volunteer work, you begin to see the size of it. It's really only about 37% who have no connection. So again, it's important to understand the scale of this, and obviously there's all kinds of reasons why these views and their needs should be important to all political leaders and opinion formers, but some of that is self-interest, and electoral. When for the first time, we have brought in people who have a voluntary volunteered and do work directly with those communities, with these communities, and you can see at the top of that are healthcare workers and also teachers who are dealing with those. And so when you think about the community, not just the people, the disabled themselves and their family members and their friends, it's also people who deal with their needs, and that is led by healthcare workers, and teachers. About 3 in 10, developed the disability, before they were, voting age, and about 10%, are seniors, but the 60%, which is the vast majority of them, are people of working age. Well, what you'll see when you're dealing with folks of working age, that there's a real difference in the proportion that are looking for a job. If you look at people with disabilities, if you're focusing on unemployment, people are temporarily unemployed, you have only 3%. The non-disabled, but 15% of those with disabilities. And so you have 22% that are employed in full time, but almost as many are unemployed or looking for work. And obviously that's a critical issue, for them. We also should know that 3/4 of those with disabilities are working class. People with high school graduates, some college, but have not completed a 4-year degree. If you look overall in the population, over 70% of the voting population is without a college degree. I think it's around 63% of the registered population. So we're dealing with working people, for the most part, and many of whom who are not retired want to work. Now, folks in the disabled community believe the people with disabilities, almost 60% think the country's on the wrong track, and on that they share that with others in the country. They are a little bit on Donald Trump than the rest of the population. It's 56% disapprove of his performance, and that may reflect some of what's going on in healthcare and other issues. And one of the things that it actually may surprise us when we ask, what is the level of interest? Percentage who pick 10 on a 10-point scale. So having the highest interest in in what's going on in voting in the elections, people with disabilities score higher than all the others that we looked at. Those are outside of it, and those that are in the extended disability community. So it may well be that they're paying close attention to what is happening, and half of whom are giving the highest level of interest to voting in politics and interest in the election. We looked at the congressional ballot on how Democratic or Republican they are, and you should. And again, we're talking now, and what you're seeing now is that there is a 16-point advantage for Democrats on people with disabilities. I should mention that you'll see when we look at the history of those with disabilities, it's not at all the case that they are more Democratic. They are much more evenly split. There's evidence that they have shifted somewhat toward the Democrats as events have developed on issues that affect, their community. We looked at the congressional ballot, and particularly if you compare the off-year election of 2014. What you saw then was that Republicans, they actually were voting Republican by 11 points in 14, but they are voting by 11 points. They're voting Democratic in intention using the generic ballot in the potential 2018 election. That's a pretty striking number, pretty striking shift. Again, there was no reason, again, we've done these polls historically as bipartisan. There was no reason to think of the disabled community as particularly Democratic, and they were evenly split in 16, but not now. There's been a major shift toward the Democrats in the disabled community. When we look at the congressional vote compared to the presidential vote, you see that they were only +3. If you just for the purpose of focusing on how democratic are people with disabilities, they were evenly split in the presidential election over a year ago, but they are +16 now in the congressional vote, suggesting that something is going on affecting them that is affecting their orientation toward politics. If you look at their attitudes, their favorability, toward the Republicans in Congress, as well as the Democratic Party, but focusing on the Republicans in Congress, we're using a thermometer scale, which means people pick on a 0 to 100 scale, 50 being a midpoint. Red is a warm, positive response. The yellow is a cool, negative, response. The intense response is the scores that are below 25. That is the most negative. And what you see is that the biggest negative feelings toward the Republican Congress is amongst people with disabilities. So again, something is happening that's affecting the kind of even split in the swing voter status of people with disabilities that have moved toward the Democrats, in this moment, in time. Let me look at the tax cut. At the time that we did this, they are 49% strongly opposed. At the time that this issue was debated, there was discussion on whether these tax cuts would have the effect, of producing entitlement reform in the future that could affect spending on Medicare and Medicaid that affects those with disabilities. But there's intense opposition to the tax cuts, amongst the disabled. And their views on the Affordable Care Act are also quite important, because if you look at people outside the disability community, views again are evenly split: 40% positive, favorable to the Affordable Care Act, 42% negative. But if you look at people with disabilities, the Affordable Care Act is clearly quite important. There's a strong, intense response, and there's a net more positive view, and that's stronger than people without disabilities, and also people in the extended community. Obviously, the Affordable Care Act has meaning and importance for them that may well be affecting their views of what's happening in America and in our community. We also looked at their values and where they distinguish themselves, from others, and it's actually very interesting. And the differences are particularly the biggest difference is on being loyal to your family and keeping your promises and fulfilling your duties. Those are the two areas where there's the biggest gap in which those with disabilities, are saying these values are important. If you look more broadly, the top of the value chain is treating everyone equally. Also important, is hard work and responsibility. But for those with disabilities, they are very focused on families and people being loyal to family, and keeping your promises and fulfilling your duties. And you could clearly see why this community would value those values, and that may well, affect the way they're responding to a whole range of institutions and what's happening in the country. We looked at views of the NRA and pro-life groups. They are actually marginally more positive toward the NRA. This is, again, prior to the most recent, events. But I think the more important one is they have views that are quite, mainstream. If you look at their views on NRA, if you look at their views on pro-life groups, it's actually fairly similar to what you see, across the board. But the most important thing is remembering how important they are, how much their views are evolving and reacting to current events. On some issues, they are quite mainstream and look very similar to to other groups. But as we saw here, on the values that are important to them, the worry about what's happening to the Affordable Care Act, the views on the tax cut, and their interest in voting is pretty distinctive. And that may well be associated with them moving away from being a group evenly split in the last election and quite Republican in the last off-year election, from a group that's now intending to vote Democratic. Obviously, things could evolve, but this is a check on a very important, take on their attitudes. And I think this was a very important survey that Respectability did, and I'm now happy to answer any questions on this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Operator, do we have any questions via the phone?
Not yet, Lauren, but ladies and gentlemen, if you have dialed in and would like to ask a question, please press 7# on your phone now, and you will be placed in the queue in the order received. Again, that's 7# on your touch-tone phone. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask a question while we're waiting for other people. So there was a lot of information that people, while they received the deck ahead of time, they received a lot of information from you. What would you say are the biggest 1 or 2 takeaways from this survey?
Well, I think this is the first is how important the disability community is. You have almost 1, in 5 that are disabled themselves, but a majority of the country, if we're dealing with family, is part of the very close disabled world. They have been obviously they have a very strong interest in work. And obviously these are very important issues for them. But they're following what's happened since the 2016 election. And this group, which has been very evenly split or even leaning Republican in our prior polls, is leaning strongly Democratic. And strikingly, have a higher interest in voting in the off-year elections than the non-disabled. And at the moment, the vote is more Democratic, to be linked toward what they're watching and what's happening in Washington and what's happening to the Affordable Care Act and what may be happening to other programs that are relevant to this community.
So in previous years, we have not found presidential candidates or other candidates to be paying attention to the disability community as a block. Do you see any changes happening there? Or do you foresee any changes happening there in the future?
Well, they should. They should. Look, these are very powerful results. And let me just put up on the what we have here on the comparison to the 2016 election. If we look at the disability community, what you see is this ought to be front and center. Anyone who is concerned with what's going to happen in the 2018 election. community is clearly paying attention. There's obviously there's opportunity for Democrats who have seen the shift away from them being split or more Republican-leaning. But obviously, the Republican Congress ought to be looking at this closely and thinking about this community as it's dealing with a whole range of policies that affect them, whether that has to do with the laws affecting the disability community itself or issues like Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act that obviously have a differential impact on this community.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from anyone on the phone?
No one's raised their hands yet, Lauren. But again, it's £7. £7 for your questions.
We seem to have a very quiet crowd. Quiet crowd today. Usually we have a lot more questions coming in. Yes.
Lauren, we have a couple now who've expressed their interest. First one is Michael. I'm unmuting your line. Go ahead, please, Michael.
Sure. I'm looking at the chart that's presently up. It shows about a 12-point margin between Republicans and Democrats, and not in the disability community, and a very similar 11-point margin in the disability community. So that would seem to indicate more that it's just a shift in the general electorate rather than in the disability community by itself. Looking at 2018.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on that particular slide, I'm looking at the 2014 where you had an 11-point. You're right from the presidential year. You're right in pointing out this is evident in both. But if you look at the 14 off year, which was obviously a wave election for the Republicans, but the disabled community was part of that. There we moved to the opposite. The number was closer in the non-disability community to being split evenly. And actually, it is. I mean, if you look at the non-disability community, it's Republican in each of the prior, and now plus 12. If you look at the, this is looking at the, if you look at the this next slide, again you're looking at the shift, from 16, till now. Again, you're looking at the disability community. People with disabilities is a plus 3 to plus 16, 13-point shift.
Right, it's more impressive.
You're right. But you're right. It is. So you're looking at a comparable shift, but you're looking at a margin combined with with them having the highest interest in voting, which is probably surprising for them being higher than the other communities on interest in voting.
Do you also have data going back before the years that you're showing in these slides?
I wish we did. No, I wish we did. These were done. Respectability, is very smart in doing these bipartisan polls and putting into the demographics questions that enable you to break out this data. But this has only happened, since Respectability began calling on pollsters to do this and show the significance of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next one up is the Honorable Melvin Curtis Poindexter. Go ahead, sir. Your line's open.
Thank you, Dr. Greenberg. Just wanted to if you could flesh out something you touched on, a shift in terms of the disability community and their position on President Trump, which I can understand, but do you have any data as to where or some of the issues that may have created more of a equal divide between Democrat, Republican when, say, President Obama was in office during his 2 terms? Was there any specific issues that were points of concern or were not addressed? And you also mentioned in terms of the disability community's position on the NRA. Do we have any data as to the specifics as to why their somewhat positive position, again, not taking into consideration what happened past weekend, but just their positive position on the NRA?
You know, it's my main, by the way, you know, the NRA has a more positive image than mainstream America and the elites recognize. And one of the reasons for having this slide in is to try to recognize how mainstream is the disability community and people with disabilities, and the fact that their views of the NRA are a little bit more positive than others is consistent with them in the past being either a swing group or even marginally lean Republican. And so I think it's part of that overall. I mean, the differences aren't that great, and so that I think it's more about them being mainstream than something distinctive about what's happening with the NRA. When I look back to to 14 when we did that poll in the post-elect in 14. That was a low turnout. In fact, it was historically low. I think it was the lowest turnout election since World War II in the off year, and part of a wave. I don't remember it was not discontent with Obama on specific issues related to this community. It was more related to feeling that the country was on the wrong track. A lot of that being economic, rather than anything specific to the community. I can't say it wasn't, but it was part of a wave election in which President Obama was arguing that the country was making progress, and the country was still pretty discontented, with the fact that median incomes had not yet gotten back to pre-crisis levels, and so I think it was more about those general issues than anything specific to their policies.
Do you have any more calls to your phone? We have a question came in online. Oh, sorry. Go on, Luke.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lauren. I'm sorry.
So we had a question that came in online, and it was, do you have any information about how people of different genders or ages answered the questions in this survey?
Nancy, are you on? To be honest, the sample size wouldn't allow us. I mean, we have it, but I'm cautious about about breaking it out in that way. So that we have 1,000 sample, we have 17% with disabilities. We have that data, but we didn't highlight it because we didn't want to get into differences that are not real. But we could, and I don't know if Nancy is on the speaker's line and can address it. We can certainly get back to you with the data on the breakout of gender, within these specific communities. We can do that for the disability community, which is which we know is half the population, and for sure we could break that out, and we can get back to you with that.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any more questions?
I don't see on the line. So. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I wanted to add one thing because I do think I should. I do want to talk about the unions, which I was trying to make a point about this community is mainstream and maybe even and shares a lot with the center of the electorate. But there is one that we measured in which the disability community is stronger, and that has to do with views of unions. And it may well be that the unions become advocates, for them. But if you look at the people with disability versus people outside, there's a really significant difference. You have a plus 19, on labor unions on favorable versus negative, versus fairly evenly split, plus 5 people outside that community. And it may well be they see unions as advocates for the community. So I think that's important to note when we think about the people, not just politicians. We think about the range of institutions and advocates who can take up these issues.
Thank you. We received one other question via our online system, and it is, and I don't know if you have the data for this, but it is, have you seen a shift in support of people with disabilities for the Affordable Care Act 2014?
Well, what we have is the data on the ACA, but we didn't necessarily ask it as a time series. What we do know is that they have. Well, I think watching it, the effort to repeal it, and apparently it's brought out their more favorable views of it, and there's a bigger block that's and a stronger net favorable, and 1/3 who have very favorable views of it that are apparent in this slide that we just presented. That may well reflect the change, but we didn't measure the Affordable Care Act in the previous poll that we did that enabled us to do the time series.
We have a question from Respectability Board member Delbert Wetter. He says, I have a comment and a question. I understand this survey focuses on voting patterns. I also am interested in the extended disability community for its potential economic power as a consumer market group and really appreciate the data that you shared. I am curious how much people with disabilities share commonalities with the extended members of the community. I'm curious to what degree you'd say the extended members of the extended disability community appear to be in lockstep with the actual disability community, i.e. people with disabilities, as far as their opinions on the issues and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Look, this is a very important question, and again, for sample size reasons, what we've done here is present either the disability the community or the extended, which is 63%. Now, what you're looking at is to look at the about 10 or 15% who are part of the extended community on its own. I think you raise a critical question. How do we get them more engaged and to react with intensity, on this? We didn't present this because we were trying to deal with enough sample size to make the bigger point about how the disabled community compares to the non-disabled. But we have that data, and we'll work with Jennifer and Lauren in breaking that out.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have any other questions later?
Lauren, to anybody raising their hand over the phone line.
Okay, great. So, Stan, anything else you would like to add before we conclude?
No, I just say thank you for Respectability for doing this simple thing of saying you should ask people. There are lots of demographic surveys that people who are shaping opinions look at. They tend not to add disability, to their survey, and what we can see here is that matters. They are reacting to events and could play an important role in events going forward.
Thank you very much. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, they are more than welcome to contact us at Respectability. We'd be glad to reach out to Stan on your behalf and to find out more information. And if anyone would like to join us as we continue our work to continue fighting stigmas and increasing opportunities for people with disabilities, we're always looking for volunteers. So you can also check us out on our website at www.respectability.org or find us on Facebook or Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you.
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.